let's get right to our next guest here. Frank Pomarico, former NFL player, former Notre Dame football player, proud son of a U of M football player, and author of Aara's Nights. Nice to have you here.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So, writing a book is not an easy thing, and some people would say it's not really even that fun. What motivated you to want to write this book?
Well, we had such a great experience playing for Ara Parseghian. I was interviewed by Blue and Gold magazine down in South Bend once, and they asked me, what was it like playing for Ara Parseghian? I said, well, he was kind of like playing for royalty. He was our King Arthur, and we were like his knights. And the gentleman paused a second, and he said, maybe you should write a book about that. I said, maybe I will. And then 8 years later, I did. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot of fun. It really wasn't that taxing for me. I was pretty passionate about it. And I wanted to get this story down on paper of my own journey from high school and grade school up through Notre Dame, and also why he was so special to us. And the funny thing is, when I started interviewing people, they all felt the same way I did. Mm-hmm. They all felt that this was somebody that they cared about much more than just a football coach. He was like a father figure to them. So it was easy to write, and it was fun to do.
Now, how did you end up going to Notre Dame? Were they heavily recruiting you out of high school? What was that made your choice to pick Notre Dame?
There was a fella that went to Notre Dame that was 3 years older than I was. His name was Larry DiNardo. Mm-hmm. And DiNardo is a name you may know from the Big Ten Network. Jerry DiNardo, his brother, and I grew up together from the 5th grade. And we went to Our Lady of Grace grade school, and then we went to St. Francis Prep together. Larry then went to Notre Dame a couple years ahead of us, and he kept talking to us about this little coach he had named Ara Parseghian, and how dynamic he was, how motivating he was, and how everybody really wanted to play for this guy. So I kind of had this in my breadbasket of wanting to play for the similar kind of guy, and in particular, Ara Parseghian. So I really wasn't recruited that heavily out of high school. I think the main reason why I was offered a scholarship was I was about Larry's size. Mm-hmm. And Larry was captain his senior year. He started as a sophomore. And they said, if we had success with Larry, maybe lightning can strike twice. Well, actually, lightning struck 2 or 3 times. And we were all starters at Notre Dame as sophomores. And we went through and had great seasons. So I was number 41 of 41 scholarships given in 1970. So when I got the opportunity, I wanted to make the most of it, and I was determined to do that.
Was it typical to have that many scholarships in one year, 41 scholarships?
I think that year that I was a freshman, there was about 120 guys on scholarship, maybe 105. I forget exactly what the number was, but it wasn't the limit that you have now of 85. What makes it very dicey for coaches to kind of blend everything together with those 4 years. I think what happens now, too, is freshmen are allowed to play. In those days, freshmen couldn't play. And I needed that year. I needed it academically, I needed it socially, and I needed it physically as far as football is concerned. You're 18 years old, and you're playing against guys that could be 22, 23 years old. So there's a big difference at that time. So I was lucky that freshmen couldn't play. But we practiced every day, and we had a little schedule of about 3 games. We played at the University of Michigan in the big house in front of about 300 people. So that's a big stadium with only 300 people there. But it was a good experience my freshman year, and I was starting guard my sophomore year, and I was able to beat out a couple of seniors and a couple of juniors, and I was determined to play. I was driven. To have that kind of drive and to have that kind of goal is something that's in some places a little unusual. But for me, it had nothing to do with my natural talent. It had to do with what I had inside. And I was going to get to that goal no matter what. And I was lucky to do it.
Talk a little bit about the difference in football then and now. I mean, obviously, you've got high school kids that are weighing in at 320 pounds that are offensive linemen. Obviously, you didn't have that back then.
No, we didn't in those days. We had 1 or 2 guys that were up around 290. Usually they were a little overweight. not too bad, though. Just to give you an example, I went back to Notre Dame this season, and I was in their locker room before practice, and the assistant coach was showing me through. And I said, "Who's that fellow right there?" He says, "That's Quentin Nelson." I said, "He's the left guard, isn't he?" And he says, "Yeah." I says, "He wears number 56, doesn't he?" He says, "Yeah, he does." I says, "I'd like to meet him because I was the left guard, and I wore number 56. Well, he's a true freshman, and he was starting. He's 6'5", he's 325 pounds, 18 years old. And this guy plays with an attitude. He's really a good player, but he looks like, just a young little boy, hardly shaving. Just that he's huge, He blocks out the sun.
Yeah.
But the difference basically is, I think, the speed and the size of the players.
What do you attribute that development to? Because obviously we see that all the way down through even junior high football, that speed and that size. What is it? Is the coaching different now, or is it just different kids?
Well, I think a couple of things have happened. I think probably nutrition has gotten a little bit better. I think also that they start specializing with kids much earlier nowadays. I mean, that doesn't add to the size that they have, but I think that in some ways that may not be as good as being able to play a number of different sports, meeting other kinds of kids that are not in your niche of football players. So when you play basketball and you're a football player, you have a tendency to not be as fluid as some of the basketball players, but you do get better as an athlete.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the things that we miss now if they start specializing football only. And but the kids are getting bigger and stronger, I think, through nutrition and just the natural course of things.
Yeah. I had a son who's a senior in high school this year, and he might have been $150, $160 at the most, and he was a middle linebacker for their team. They came up against that Coldwater team that almost made it to the state finals, and he said to me, "Dad, it hurt after that game." He hadn't felt that kind of pain before. Did you ever get to that point in your life where you were playing and you said, "Oh man, this hurts too much"?
I never did. And the reason why I say that is because I had such drive to get to my goal. I think first of all, I had a dream that I wanted to play there at Notre Dame for Ara Parseghian. I think Notre Dame was important, but playing for Ara Parseghian was the main thing for me. I mean, if he was at North Carolina or at Miami of Ohio, I might have wanted to go to those places too, because he was such an outstanding individual. I think that, what happens is that you learn to sacrifice, and it's not a bother to you, especially if the end product is your goal. And for me, it didn't matter how many squats I had to do, or deadlifts, or bench presses. What I was going to do is that if that's what it took to get to that position, I was going to do everything I had to do. Push cars, carry tires around my head, whatever crazy thing I had to do. And we worked out like wild men, but none of us complained about it. It wasn't like, "Oh gosh, we have to do another set of this," or "we have to run an extra mile." No, we never worried about that because we knew the end thing was the goal.
Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit about Aara and your title, Aara's Knights, and obviously Knights being like the Knights of the Round Table. What made him the kind of coach that you wanted to play for?
Well, I think the thing that separates Aara from a lot of coaches is that, first of all, he felt that he was taking a parent's son, and he was going to be like his parent for the next 4 years. And he was somebody that was going to try to instill in them character, integrity, and being part of this big unit or this program. He wanted people to stand out, not just on a football field, but he wanted them to behave properly. He also wanted them to be alert about what was going on in the world. He was somebody that expected you, had high expectations for you as far as how your behavior was going to be, and that you were respecting women, and that you were respecting adults, and you're respecting your own teammates. So this is something that was really important to him. And for me, he was looking for somebody that was hungry to play. And I was as hungry as anybody to play at Notre Dame. So to go there and to be around this man, For me, it was the culmination of a dream. And then once I got that opportunity, that dream was coming true, I took as much advantage of the opportunity as I could.
Let's talk about the championship season. Obviously, a big highlight in your career and probably in Notre Dame's football legacy. What was it about it that made that season so special?
Well, the year before, we had won 8 games, and we were invited to play in the Orange Bowl. We played against a Nebraska team that had a fella named Johnny Rodgers who had won the Heisman Trophy. They beat us 40-6. They humiliated us in front of 50 million people that were watching in the Orange Bowl that year. So I think in the spring, what we came together with as a unit, as a team, was that, hey, we want to prove that we're not that bad. That, you know, we deserved a better score than 40-6. So we were going to put forth an effort to prove that every week. We didn't really think we were going to win the national championship. Of course, that's always your goal. But what we wanted to do is just to prove every game and every week that we can be competitive with who's ever out there. And slowly but surely, we got to the middle of the season, and we're playing against a Southern California team that won a national championship in '72, and then they won it in '74. So you know they were loaded with talent. They had Pat Hayden, Lynn Swann, Richard Wood, Artemis Parker. These were all famous names from back in those days that went on to play in the NFL. And we beat them 23-14. And I love that game because when they always show the highlights, the first play in the second half is a sweep to the left with me and Jerry DiNardo pulling out. And our fastest halfback, Eric Pennick, goes 85 yards for a touchdown. And it just blew the doors right off of the stadium. I never heard the stadium quite that loud. And it was pretty much pandemonium. And then we held on to win the game 23-14. And then marched on to play in the Sugar Bowl. The funny thing, the last game we played that year was against, in the regular season, was against Air Force. And after the game, we played on Thanksgiving Day, and that was the last time that Notre Dame Stadium wasn't sold out, which is some 42 years ago. So Aara came, we had a meeting, and Aara came and says, okay, guys, what we have to do is hope that Michigan and Ohio State tie. Now, how likely is that to be? And because Oklahoma was on probation, Alabama was #1, and we were like number 4 or 5 at the time. So we get an opportunity to play against them because these other guys tie, Michigan and Ohio State tie, and then Oklahoma is ineligible. So we wind up playing Alabama in a slugfest, and we come out on top.
Now, well, that was the famous Michigan State game where Duffy Daugherty played for the tie, right, against U of M, and that's what allowed that to happen?
Well, actually, I think that the famous tie with Duffy Daugherty, that's Michigan State.
Yeah.
That was the 10-10 tie in 1966.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's how the book actually starts with that.
I remember reading that in the book.
With that, that's when I really started to get enamored with Ara Parseghian. My dad said, boy, this guy is really keeping his cool. And it's such an intense game. And I thought, if my dad is that impressed with this guy, he's got to be pretty special. And then, of course, we learn later on who he is.
Yeah. Now, the book, Ara's Nights, where can people get a hold of one of these?
Well, they can go to my website, which is www.arasnights.com, and they can purchase it right there.
Okay.
And I'll sign it and send it to them and put in a couple of nice action shots from those days.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Frank, I can't tell you how, I started reading, I didn't get through the whole thing, but I'm loving it. And I already got my sister-in-law who went to St. Mary's who wants to read it itself.
Good.
So thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure.
All right, Frank Pomarico from Ara's Nights, and we'll be back with more right after this.